yours. Am I got it on mine as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just press record.
Thank you. Okay, someone going to say?
Okay, cool. So thanks everyone for coming to the symposium. I hope you enjoyed today and our workshop with Matthew. And yeah, it's been amazing to see some of the work that you've created. And thank you, Matthew, for coming down today. And yeah, I'm going to leave these guys to have a panel discussion. We will also answer the questions.
Just to give a bit of an intro to Symposium today. My name is Matthew Needham. I'm a designer and upcyclist based in London, and I'll be hosting this discussion. I'm joined here by the rest of the panel, all of whom are masters of sustainable thinking, all having their own area of expertise, who I'll let introduce themselves to in a moment. We're really looking forward to hearing from them. 2020 became a year we were all unprepared for, which brought a huge and unexpected shift within the fashion industry into both our personal and professional lives. Our future shifted overnight as we were forced to stay inside and work from home. It was a time for self-reflection, asking ourselves what's most important and how we can make conscious changes within our own lives to better the planet. As we look forward to the future, we are presented with an opportunity for change, a space to present new viewpoints and more sustainable approaches as we challenge a new norm for an industry in repair. So I'll just hand over to the panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, these guys know me, but I mean, you know, obviously I'm Christine Radcliffe. Obviously I'm program leader for fashion styling, image making, and we work very hard. And these are the current first year cohort. We're working hard to. I mean, I run a course on something called fashion styling, image making, but I can't any longer deliver a course that doesn't have. I hate the word sort of sustainability, but it doesn't have ethics, sustainability, or hard with it to do with. So we're trying to inbuild it into the program, even though the university doesn't have, you know, the course isn't written. So, but we're just adapting every module now to have an answer that either answers the community or sustain, you know, so it'll be core. And why it's important with first years. Anyway, I'm digressing. It's about them. I'm a program leader. 20 years of teaching, 25 years of. You know, and I developed this course. These guys know this.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Marta. I work as a coordinator for our sustainability team at the university. So as you probably know, Salford is very much sustainability oriented. So our role within the university is to facilitate that and to support that, and to generally help the university with the mission of embedding sustainability in every aspect of your experience mostly and our university life. So the way we do this is by, for example, taking part in events like this, also organizing events, sharing best practice, supporting behavior change, and sharing any work that you're doing, like we did during Go Green Salford, for example. Yeah, that's everything from me. Thank you.
Cool. My name is Matthew Needham. I'm a designer from London and a cyclist. And yeah.
Hello, Rory. I'm Rory Mullen. I'm an artist and set designer. I'm an alumni of Salford. I did my master's here in fine art. Graduated like 5 years ago, and I use sort of found materials and everything you can find in a bin essentially. Screen. Carrie.
Hi, I'm Carrie Summers. I'm the founder and the Global Operations Director of Fashion Revolution. And before Fashion Revolution, I had my own sustainable brand, which I set up in 1992, which was the first brand in the world to be Fair Trade certified.
That's fun.
Before I do that, can I just reiterate, we were going to, but you know, it's called Sky Woman Falling mainly because of Robin Wall Kimmerer and the creation myth and talking about where we put our values. So I just wanted to make sure you all were aware. It's not a random title, it comes from Robin, okay? And we were going to do that Thanksgiving address, but hey, we'll sort of mentally do it, won't we? Do you know, because it's so important that we have like this circular and that we mix, I think we all try and understand. There's enough for everybody if we all, she has like a sharing bowl and there's enough for everybody if we just take one. So it was just a title in case anybody on the panel was unsure where it came from. Sorry.
No,
These guys know.
Clear it up. Yeah, so in preparation for this panel discussion, we've asked the first year students to submit their questions. So I have a list of questions and we're just sort of going to go through we'll skim through there's certain topics, and then if any of you have questions throughout, just raise your hand and we can just sort of answer them in between. To sort of start it off, I'm not too sure whose question this was, but it's how much has the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated the shift towards greater sustainability in fashion? I don't know who that's directed towards, but I think this is as well, like, it's such a personal experience.
Has it got the student's name?
It doesn't have the student's name.
Oh, we
Do
did
you
that.
know who, does anyone know who that was? No. I think for me, it's a very personal thing for everybody, because the pandemic's affects everyone in different ways. For me, I mean, a year ago I was hunting for trash on the street to make clothes from, and now I can't do that anymore. So it's shifted not my perspective of how we should be, improving the world and how my practice is, but it's definitely affected physically how I work and my ability to go to teach at university and show in fashion weeks and make collections in the same way I used to. So physically, I think for all of us, we've also experienced it in different ways. But I don't know what everyone else thinks.
I mean, it makes you just think you've got more than enough. It makes me super grateful for what I have, and it makes me think I've got more than enough things. So not having access to things, I don't buy online. So I don't know that. So COVID made me rethink: do I need everything? And actually, I was fine. You don't need. So.
I think as well, it's like if you're saying you're hunting for rubbish on the streets, it's kind of made me fearful of picking up stuff now, because you're so aware of just being like it's like COVID is everywhere. You know what I mean? Even anything at all, I suppose natural stuff, you kind of are like, this will be okay. But cardboard or, normal stuff, it's like even hunting through bins is like really risk now. I don't know. It's like you kind of have to recalibrate your way of finding stuff. So then that kind of, I suppose that has made it less sustainable, because you kind of push towards buying new things essentially. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone's sort of mindset has changed. What about you, Carrie? What about Fashion Revolution?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the question is, how much has it accelerated the shift? I think it's like, has it accelerated or decelerated? Because we've seen the brands instituting a whole range of responses and recovery measures following the impact of COVID. But these were mostly within their own, their business operations, the well-being of their employees. And as we've seen very clearly, that they weren't as concerned about their supply chain workers. These are the brands who don't talk about being responsible business partners, but they've just, cut and run from so many of these vulnerable people. So in terms of, how much, I think, in the best case scenario, we'll see these big brands using this moment to reinforce their strategic commitment and coming up with practical actions to shift towards greater transparency, more sustainable business models, mature industrial relations, and those better buying practices that we so desperately need to see. But I think, we've also got to bear in mind that we could also see the worst case scenario. We could see a lot of that progress which has happened, particularly over the last 8 years, being rolled back. We could see reductions in worker safety. We could see worsened environmental sustainability. We could see transparency efforts coming to a standstill. We know we're already seeing workers going hungry, and who knows what the impact is going to be on India at the moment. So I think we are probably not going to know even this time next year. I think it's looking back in 5 years' time, we'll really know how much has it accelerated the shift, or has it accelerated it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as well, the sort of linguistics around sustainability and branding. Over the last year, we've turned and switched to this sort of online digital realm. And, every brand is talking about how they're sustainable. There's like massive billboards, like Adidas Superstar in the Hackney, and it's the linguistics, like whether or not it's for the right reasons or if it's to sell, more garments. I don't know. I think it's more widely spoken about, because obviously people are being more conscious about the way they consume. People are being more conscious about, maybe they're mending clothes in their house. Maybe they're like, we were having this panel discussion last week during Fashion Revolution Week, and we were talking about how this idea of mending clothes in your own home, and how the consumer is going to be, doing things like that, and like learning new skills and like knitting and things your grandma would have done maybe,
something that there might have been like a stigma around. Well, not a stigma, or that it wasn't necessarily like cool to be doing. Now it's kind
You know, your generation, like on Depop all the time, and like on Twitter, TikTok and stuff, I see people like upcycling their old jeans, which is fab. But then we have to think about as well, is that going to change the way that our consuming habits are? You know, are you guys going to be buying less, but you're going to be shopping in charity shops and making your own clothes? What does that have to say for fashion and the fashion industry? I think it's really, really interesting. Another question, what role do designers play and what can they influence and what role model effect do they have? So the effect of designers basically within the industry. I mean, I think from my perspective, I use my platform in order to talk about things that I really care about and I think very important for the future. It's not about, you know, just selling clothes. It's never about that. And it's not just about aesthetic. It's about communicating a message. Like the project we were doing today, we're talking about this idea of communicating a narrative and a story and a very important buzzword like transparency or cyclability. And I think your job as image makers and communicators to the next generation is so vital, because I can make something that's part of my collection, but it's the way that you portray it in a magazine or you showcase it to the world that's really important. You need to communicate the message of the designer or make your own message, you know, and utilize the clothing of the designers to tell that story and tell, you really have that power. So I think that's something to really like bear in mind. I don't know anyone else.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but and then as well, I think the challenge is obviously with designers, it's like sometimes you kind of forget there is sort of a vacuum as well. That's like it's like other designers or people that are into it. They're the sort of people that are, you know, connected with it. So it's like just normal people as well. They're the sort of people that are, you know, joke soaps that don't have anything to do with the fashion industry. Do you know what I mean? It's like, which is obviously the major challenge as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, I don't know how you see this, Carrie, as well, but I mean, there's a lot of designers now who are doing something sustainable. I mean, if you're not talking about sustainability or upcycling or recycling within your work, then you're almost like irrelevant at this moment in time. I think you know, anything in fashion, it's fashionable. It's meant to be, you know, of the now, of the time. So what my question is, well, I mean, we're all learning, you know, at the same time. So none of us are really like masters in it. But what I'm always questioning is this just now, or is this actually going to happen? You know, like Fashion Revolution's been going, is it 7 years now, Carrie, or 8 years?
8 years, yes.
8 years. Yeah, and Fashion Revolution have been talking about, you know, sustainability within the supply chain and within the fashion industry in general, but is this just going to be a phase? You know, is this fashionable now, but then how's it going to change?
I can't talk about it because I'm not a designer, but I can talk about it from a consumer liking designer clothes. So I think it's so important. So when you talk about a role model, do you represent, I think you choose with your money what you want to put on your body. And so I'm very conscious of what I wear, and especially, I know it sounds crazy, but I'm in front of a whole lot of students day in, day out. So I'm saying it's a styling course, and so what I'm wearing, but what I outwardly say to the world. So I'm so conscious of everything I wear. Hey, I'm not perfect by a long chalk, but your role model, I'm the vehicle for, you're the consumer's the vehicle for a designer's vision, isn't it, really, to some point? Because you're saying this is what, you know, you're the outward thing. So I think it's important we all think about what we're wearing. I know, and I'm just so thankful that like Depop and stuff, that vintage is becoming a massive thing with young people, massive, you know, and I really like that vintage is becoming cool. I grew up on vintage, so for me, vintage is nothing like, you know, but I know to these guys it's something new. So I'm digressing from being a designer, saying we're wearing vintage, but just wearing what design you wear. That's what I was trying to say. What design you wear, it's a choice. So I put my money where,
Yeah, you vote with.
Yeah. I mean, I think from our perspective, you know, design and design education is absolutely key, because that's where it starts. You know, it starts with the choice of the fibres, the decision about the longevity of the garment, the pattern cutting process. And you know, we've seen, you know, just we're seeing around us now with the COVID pandemic. It's just that direct consequence of the human impact on the natural world. I mean, we've been using the statistic all Fashion Revolution Week, about 150 million trees are already logged every year to be turned into cellulosic fabrics like viscose. Apparently that's already out of date and it's 200 million trees a year. We know that cattle ranching is the largest driver of deforestation in the Amazon, but at the same time, a lot of the vegan leathers, we want to make sure that those are using agricultural waste and they're not using more plastic. So it's, I think the designer has a real responsibility. I think it's a difficult time to be a designer. You're having to look at everything, from your packaging through to your fibres, to your choice of, the threads that you're using. But I think this needs to happen if we're going to fix that relationship with the natural world and halt deforestation. So I think there's a lot of responsibility on designers at the moment.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I also think because as image makers or photographers or stylists, like you have a direct connection with the consumer. It's not always the designer who has the connection, because some average Joe might go down to H. Smith's and buy a magazine and just read through the magazine, but that image that you're giving to them is your image. So you could, I've had designers take my clothes and put it in some, I don't know, type of shoot that have no relevance to what my clothes are about, So it's your responsibility as well, and your job, your opportunity to really educate yourselves about what it is you want to say and how you want to communicate that to the world, whether that be about material sustainability, whether that be about ethics or community or mending. I don't know. It's just really important to consider, I think. We could talk about the consumers actually. So we've got, do you think the pandemic period of rest will reform our mindset towards collective responsibility for both people and the planet? So this time period, do you think that it's gonna? It's a very lengthy question.
I mean, who's to say? I mean, you'd like to say, wouldn't you?
Yeah, we don't. Yeah.
But there's also people are shopping. They forget, so we quickly forget the period we've been in as soon as. I mean, I do. I've been shopping. I was Greta me. I'm not buying any new clothes. But but so I don't know. I don't know. We'd hope, wouldn't we? Yeah. We'd hope. There's surely got to be a shift. Surely, because surely you guys feel, because you've experienced it, surely that's now in your memory that you've experienced it. So it's not a fictitious thing, and that could happen tomorrow, it could happen again. This pandemic's only meant to be the start of more things. So can you see, because you've gone through this, you're very aware of what it felt like. I will never ever forget empty shelves, empty streets, nobody going, I won't ever forget that in my lifetime. I've never experienced anything like that. So that memory surely is a collective memory. So surely going forward, you would want to try and put a spanner in that, surely, and try and think about ways. I don't know. I'm speaking for all those people. I don't know. It makes me think, definitely. It does make me think.
I think that from a purely environmental point of view, we've seen the sort of impact on the environment that we have when we don't interact with cities, for example, as much. Yeah. And I know that there's a lot of coverage in the media right now saying that, actually there will be a bounce back from that, so it doesn't matter, but actually it does, because for the first time the conditions sort of changed for all of us at the same time. So we all changed our lifestyles at the exact same time, and we saw what can happen if we actually come together. So in a way, we got a chance, one in a lifetime chance, to see what would happen if we actually changed the way that we live. And I think that even if there is a bounce back in terms of, air quality or emissions, we see now clearly that we can change, and that has a direct and very quick effect on wildlife. For example, birds and wildlife started coming back to the cities days or weeks after the streets emptied. So it can be a really quick change, but we need to make it together and at the same time. So I think there's definitely a lesson to be learned, but we need to make sure that we don't not just go back to our habits, but don't try to make up for that period and for the lost productivity, for the lost production, but to actually learn a lesson from what's been happening for the last year.
Yeah, because it's like a once in a lifetime opportunity almost, because it's almost like wiping the slate clean. Yeah. And we had a question last week that was something to do with like what's going to be next and what's going to happen next, and we can't say. You know, no one can say. No one knows.
Extinction.
Yeah, it's just like it's our opportunity to pave the new way, you know, and talk about what we want to be next. Like, how do you want to see the future? I think that's really important. Have you seen, how has the interaction with Fashion Revolution been over the last year, Carrie? Is there like any sort of influx in it, or like Fashion Revolution Week this year as well?
Well, we haven't got the metrics back from Fashion Revolution Week this year, but I mean, we're certainly seeing, I think we're seeing a lot more interest in getting involved in the nuance, the complexity of the issues. We're seeing people doing a deeper dive, which is so necessary. I think people are getting, just a bit fed up with social media, where we're having these very binary arguments and people are jumping to conclusions. And I think there's that real hunger to examine and explore, because there are no easy solutions to this. It's incredibly complicated, and we can't say, oh well, sort of natural fibres are this much better than plastics. We know that there's all those other implications of using, cotton, for instance. So I think there's a real unpicking. We've seen thousands of people watching our Fashion Question Time, our cultural appropriation webinar, and I think that's so important. We need to take people beyond. We've got this at Fashion Revolution: be curious, find out, and do something. And there's still a lot of people still at that curiosity stage. But for the people who've already been curious, the awareness has been raised, we need to take them deeper and then push them towards taking simple actions, more complicated actions, and lifestyle change.
Definitely. That could lead on to, what do you think are some of the benefits to a more digitized fashion industry? So this like interaction online, people are spending a lot of time on their phones and stuff like that. I don't know how you shifted towards a more digital presentation of your work, or?
Sort of. I don't know. Remember we were talking about Matty earlier, saying like Matty Bowen, he was saying that his, usually there'd be like a big fashion show and sort of pomp and ceremony, and then the first one he just did it in sort of like a church near his house, and it's like he was saying how insane it was that he made all the clothes in the house and shot it and then sort of put them back, in boxes, no one has saw them. So I don't know. It's like the question is, does that, is that kind of, I don't know, does it like kind of lose some of its power, the kind of performative aspect of like actually doing shows and stuff?
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you done presentation?
I think for me, like, because I went back to St Martin's to an MA and finished last February, and so I was like, great, I'm going to go back to school, do that for a bit, and then come back out again and carry on what I was doing. But everything changed. So for me, someone who, when I was doing my BA, we didn't like have Instagram, we didn't use Instagram, so all of that presentation like online, I wasn't used to it. So it was really like such a culture shock to be thinking, okay, now everything has to be online, so I've got to learn how to use these platforms properly and like showcase myself properly, and even things like hashtags. I know you probably won't laugh, but like I didn't know anything about hashtags before last year. But like now it's so necessary, because if you want your work to be out there, like you have to become part of the algorithm.
Does it have to be? I mean, I'm on iPhone 3, I'm super minimal, I run a giant course on, I am very minimal on technology, and I try and encourage, I know we've had COVID, so interaction's been such a hard thing, which has been hard for us all, I think. I massively believe in human beings and humanity and not a digital, but I'm old school, so I grew up, I'm the same as you, I grew up without phones. I mean, can you imagine, I didn't have a mobile phone, so, you didn't, I've come from an upbringing of living in countryside and values and So for me, I'm not wedded to that. I'm not wedded to I'm not wedded to a computer. I'm not wedded to phones. I like experience and like the world and like these guys and like them as humans and like being with them. And so I'm less, but I understand the world is somehow it's a marriage, isn't it? We've got to. I understand it. Yeah, but.
I'm the same as you. I don't like it.
Yeah.
Like I really wish I didn't have to do it.
Because it's a fake world. Instagram, I could say anything. I could show any world I wanted on Instagram and say it's mine, but it isn't mine. So I think we have to be careful about, again, what we show, because they're so influential, aren't they, to young people, because they just never let go of. I looked on the tram this morning, and I think I I read physical books, but I looked on the tram this morning, sorry, and every single person was looking down on their phone. I couldn't see a single person on the tram. Trams are getting really busy. Every single person was on a phone, and I just thought, I read physical books, but I look at the foxes, I look at the flowers, I look on the tram tracks, amazing, and I just sometimes think, the world's beautiful, the weather's beautiful, it's gorgeous somewhere along the way. There's a real world out there, isn't there? You know, it's not just me.
Yeah. I think.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, how do you think social media and sustainable fashion can coincide when sort of like the whole point of social media is quite, it promotes overconsumption. So like, what role do you think, like how will they coincide with each other when it's sort of like opposing ways of living? If that makes sense.
It's a really interesting question, like you phrased it. I think
Like how can sustainable fashion like be used as social media when social media like promotes overconsumption?
did you hear that, Carrie?
No, I didn't. Although I do want to say something about the digitalised fashion industry question, but I couldn't hear that question.
Maybe Carrie talks about her thing and then we go to your question, and I'll repeat it afterwards. Do you want to carry on what you were going to say, Carrie?
Okay, yeah, no, I just wanted to talk, I think we've talked about, digitalised fashion industry with regard to consumers, but I think it's so important to think about how important the digitalised fashion industry is with regard to the supply chain as well, because a lot of, or most garment workers have a mobile phone, and we know that so many of the brands, they're not carrying out that due diligence, they're not doing, carrying out that assessment on the ground on a regular basis. They're still relying on audits for their basic compliance. So we've seen, Fashion Revolution's worked with microfinance opportunities who are using sort of digitalisation and technology to get feedback from hundreds of garment workers in Bangladesh every single week. And this really provides brands with an insight so they know what issues are emerging, rather than finding out about them, too late, 6 months down the line at the next audit. Recent surveys have shown that something like the average unreliability for audits is around 45%. And it's also, it's so important for transparency and traceability. And we know that some of those, the most severe and explosive conditions and the worst environmental damage happens deep down in those supply chains, where the materials are grown, the fibres come from, and that's where the brands really have very little visibility. And I think a lot of these technologies like blockchain and other technologies, sort of there's even ways of binding DNA into cotton. These are going to be really important in terms of transparency and traceability, ways of avoiding modern slavery and forced labour and child labour in the future.
Because Fashion Revolution is a very it's a digitized movement in a way as well, isn't it, Carrie? Because like a lot of it is online and talking. Has anyone heard of Who Made My Clothes? You have, yeah, okay. Small nods, but it's a hashtag that Fashion Revolution have been doing for years, and it's the idea of asking the brands who made my clothes, like asking who made my clothes, calling them out. And as Carrie was saying, every worker has a phone, and they have a sort of placard that you can hold and say, I made your fabric, I made your hat, I made your whatever. And it's this idea of showcasing that on digital social media, so consumers and brands can see, like, okay, yeah, that person, they're very transparent in the way that they produce, or they're producing here. Or whereas before there was a time when we had no idea who made the clothes. Like, could you tell me who made your jumpsuit? No. Could you tell me who made your jacket? No. And so the aim of it is to try and get to that point where you really do understand, okay, so this transparency is there, and I could tell you, And just maybe onto your question, which kind of feeds onto it in a way, is what was the first part of it again?
Well, I don't know, I think it's just quite interesting because obviously we are promoting sustainable fashion on social media, but that is sort of a place where overconsumption is promoted. So it's like difficult when sustainable fashion sort of becomes the thing which is, down to word it, like that's now being overconsumed, whereas it should be like ethical consumption, which is the thing.
So it's like overconsumption of social media, Carrie, and like promoting fashion through social media that is about overconsumption.
Yeah, like just
Social-
how can you use social media like to promote sustainable fashion in the right way, if that makes sense.
In the right way.
Yeah, getting influencers and stuff, it's like, if you have an influencer like promoting sustainable fashion every day, that's still, I don't know, that's still over-consuming, and you should be like buying things what you need, like not, I don't know if I'm making any sense.
What, like making
No,
your own
doesn't make
choice? Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense.
But if you're promoting it and have like millions of followers, if everyone wants this bespoke, tailor-made
Yeah,
clog or something, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like then there's still like millions of clogs being made,
Yeah.
even if it is sustainably made. Yeah.
yeah,
But then also, I think with social media, it's like with everyone, it's like if you're in any way creative, it's like it is like dancing with the devil because you're like it is basically evil. But then it's like that's the way everyone talks and is interconnected nowadays. So it's like you kind of have to hold that arm's length essentially. But I don't know. I think at the same time, it's like it's great that there is interconnection and like you're saying about the who made my clothes. It's like if everyone is made aware as that, because obviously before social media, people wanted to like letter writing, calling people. Do you know what I mean? Now you're like you can plug it into do your maths.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like that the interconnectedness of it is good, but also it's sort of
Yeah, like I mean, for me, in the last year, not being able to show my work in person, social media's got me work. You know, it's kept me afloat to a degree. Whereas before, like you go to Fashion Week, and as much as we hate Fashion Week, it's still a congregation of people, and you sort of see people you haven't seen in 6 months, and you know, maybe that person stays in your mind, and then you work with them again. And then, you know, they bring you on a project, and so it is this kind of like communal aspect that we've lost. So in a way, without social media, I don't know where we'd be right now after the last year.
yeah, exactly.
I think also in terms of social media, we need to remember that it's a platform or platforms that should serve us and not the other way around. So it depends on us how we use it. But I think, and this is not only with fashion, but in many, many other things, we have this culture of influencing other people, for example. So there are images of a certain lifestyle being created, and sustainability is one of these things. If you're sustainable, you have certain items, you live in a certain way, you eat certain things, and you can see that on Instagram, on TikTok, everywhere. And the idea behind sustainability, which is just considering your impact in everything you do, is lost, and it becomes more about having, you know, this reusable cap and that shirt and things like that. So I think we need to remember that to an extent that is not real, because no one really lives like that 24/7, and this is just mostly to make money. So I think we need to be really conscious of the content that we're consuming, and maybe looking for those adverts in the content that we think is just, you know, lifestyle images, and just using social media to spread our own message. I can see more and more different creators who are showing like, actually, you don't need that. Like that's trending right now, but you don't need that. And just remembering that it is us that create the content as people, and it's not necessarily, because it's been flipped in the last few maybe months or years, where the brands started to dictate sort of what we put out and what we feel comfortable with sharing, and it should be the other way around. We should be the ones controlling it. And I think the campaigns like Who Made My Clothes is a really good example of that, because this is the example of social media used to on the other sort of side of the spectrum, and just saying like, oh, we can increase the transparency of brands using social media, instead of decreasing it almost and trying to make profit in a very sneaky way by selling people this idea that, oh, if you buy this or that, your life will be this way, which is very, very, I think, desirable to everyone, because it's so easy to, you know, just buy certain things and making and feeling like you're just going to change your life completely, which I think is something that we've probably all experienced at some point.
No, most definitely. And like, no one's perfect, you know, like it's fine to make mistakes.
I was just going to say, I think we have to think even beyond social media, like even when we're looking at stuff like ID Online or Dave's Digital, even news sources, a lot of that stuff is paid advertorials. So I think we don't have to just keep saying social media. I think it's across every media, like we have.
Yeah, totally. No, definitely. I think, I mean, no one's perfect. Like, I make mistakes, we all make mistakes, we're all learning at the same time, you know. So I think you have to remember that. You know, it can be very overwhelming thinking like, you know, shit, I've got to like be sustainable, I've got to like present a certain side of myself, I've got to be perfect. But it doesn't have to be that way. You know, we all teach each other different things, and we find different solutions to problems, and maybe you have a solution for something that you don't, and you share and you communicate. But I think this general air of communication is just so important. And thanks. Yeah, I mean, amongst designers as well, collaboration is a big thing right now. Like massive brands collaborating as well, you know, working together and not just being this is my territory and that's your territory. And this idea of community, I felt that's really increased over last year. I don't know about you guys.
We've embedded that. And like the students we did a big community project with these guys. Yeah. So it's like we're trying to, as I say, plant seeds to make it the norm, that you wouldn't think sharing is a strange thing.
Yeah.
Or supporting or giving away or working for things that we don't necessarily think are in our periphery. But actually, when we work with them, we find we're all one, we're all the same human beings, we're all hearts, blood, people, physical beings, aren't we? So, you know, they did, and the results were stunning. I mean, stunning. They didn't even know that they were going to do that project. So, you know, young people are I find them amazing to work with. They're very open to, we could preconceive that they will want to do that, but actually, if you open the door, I think you all did amazing work, but you didn't know you were going to do that. Does that make sense? If we present things that they didn't know, we don't just go along offering the same old projects, you know, working. We change, the course never stops. We're trying to address we're trying to move to make these students fit into a modern world as well.
Also, when you finish school, like that's what, 3 years time, like you're going to be the future. You are the next voice. And, so
you know, these guys found community here in Salford. They had to find their own community group. We didn't even give them that. I mean, how amazing, you know, we just said work with and so they found all sorts. So we're trying to, you know, it's great designers are working, and we're trying to, you know, I think it's the future. Working together, even this panel, is a good thing.
Yeah.
Because we're all together talking with a group of people, and I think that's only got to be. I'm working very much with the Green Team. We're trying to embed that for all the work we do. You know, we've now got a constant dialogue. We're talking about projects for next year. So instead of the Green Team being a morphic thing, we've now, but the uni hasn't told me to do that. I've just taken it on board that I will work with the Green Team. So, and I think that's a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a great thing with you guys, and just good, positive.
I remember being in school, we had the sustainability project, and it was just a project. This was like, 6 years ago. And it was when we first started to introduce it to universities and stuff. And now it should just be embedded. I think it should just be better than everything.
Yeah.
And it was amazing when you were talking about it to me through the week. There's a question for you, Carrie. It says, Carrie, what lesson did you learn while taking your trip at sea?
Oh gosh, just one lesson.
Maybe you can just explain what that means as well to people who don't know.
Yeah, of course. So not quite this time, in February to March last year, I was oblivious of the pandemic, sailing 2,000 miles from the Galapagos to Easter Island to investigate microplastic and toxic chemical pollution. And, you know, I don't know if the students know, but textiles and clothing account for 34.8% of primary global microplastic pollution, which, you know, is really considerable. Even I think the lowest estimates are that we lose 700,000 microfibers from our clothing every single wash cycle. So we sailed, and every day we were dropping a biscuit bottle to collect the water from the water column. We would put a manta trawl, and we were sieving the water and analysing it, work out what kind of plastics there were. And it was so shocking. We sailed into the South Pacific Gyre, and this is one of the most remote places in the ocean. And, you know, we were, from the nearest landmass, it was something like 4,000 or 5,000 miles. And every sieve, so, you know, every time we put it through the sieves, we would find 25, 30 different pieces of plastic, you know, fibres just coiling around the sample bottle. And I think this is important. I mean, it's the plastic, but it's also the chemicals which are in and on that plastic as well. So in every glass of water, every cup of tea, we are literally drinking those plastics, even if it's cellulosic fibres as well. We're drinking those fibres and we're drinking those chemicals. And I mean, the fashion industry has something like 15,000 different chemicals that it uses in the manufacturing process. I was part of a very small closed group recently that was talking about the chemicals and learned that fertility rates globally are dropping by 1% a year. I mean, 1% a year. Why isn't this a huge crisis that we're doing something about? But a lot of this is down to the endocrine disrupting chemicals in our bodies. And the co-founder of that expedition, Emily Penn, and the previous crew had their blood tested for 35 chemicals that were banned by the United Nations, including a lot of the ones typically found in our clothing and textiles like flame retardants, water repellent, pesticides, insecticides. And they found 29 actually certified banned chemicals in her bloodstream. So I think this is something we really have to take very, very seriously. And in particular, I think people who are working in recycling had kind of off the scale levels of chemicals in their bloodstream when they looked at sort of where people worked in blood being tested in some recent surveys. And this isn't on most people's radars, and I've been banging on about it for years, but I think the impact of these chemicals, when we wear them, when people wear school uniforms, but also the impact when it gets into the environment, we have to really start taking this incredibly seriously, because it's as big of an issue probably as the climate crisis in terms of its impact on our health and well-being of future generations.
That's absolutely amazing. She got smart. I haven't heard that story from start to finish, so that's insane.
Yeah, so
I remember you doing that. No, but I remember that. I remember watching on Instagram and stuff. You had you were live streaming it and stuff like that. Is it still on there? Is it on your Instagram and stuff? So can people go and see it?
There will be some there. I wasn't live streaming, which we had no reception at all for the whole time we were at sea, but I did make some videos, so they will still be on my Instagram feed, which is at Carrie Summers.
You should go and have a look. That's amazing. What changes have you made as an individual, knowing more deeply the social and environmental implications of the fashion industry? How has your work changed as a result? Like essay questions, aren't they?
Yeah, right. Well, that's probably work.
And then, I think that, so maybe how has your work changed as a result, basically, of the sorry, let me just read the whole thing again. What changes have you made as an individual, knowing more deeply the social and environmental implications of the fashion industry? So knowing what we know, how has your work changed, basically? I forget today. It's not just fashion industry, I think it's just general as well.
It's the context work. I mean, me as a program leader, me and my own photography work.
Both, but obviously they intertwine as well, because you do your own work. Yeah. This also impacts how you teach people. So knowing, understanding and knowing what you know. Who submitted the question? Is there? No, you don't remember.
Somebody did ask it.
Okay. Well, for me, I think when I didn't know I was upcycling when I started upcycling, so I started collecting trash and making things out of old things because my dad's a carpenter and I just really like working in his workshop and I just like old things. That's why I started doing what I do. Then, after meeting Ursula, who is the creative director of Fashion Revolution, she was telling me, she was like, you're upcycling, you're doing this, you're doing that, and I had no idea. And it wasn't until then that I started researching and understanding more about policies and change makers and how the industry is structured and this idea of transparency and all of these words I have no idea about before. And so since then, it's just been a case of building upon my aesthetic and what I know, and I think we're always learning. So you guys will teach me something today, and I'll learn something from Christine. And so that's how my work is. Does that answer the question? I think it did. I just went on a bit of a tangent, but
That's carpenter.
but that's carpenter. Yeah, definitely. But sort of understanding the environmental impacts of how's your work changed as a result? Environmental implications of the fashion industry. But is your work mostly in the fashion industry?
Yeah, but it's I don't know. I find it strange as well because it's even though all the stuff I use is like cardboard and
Yeah.
everything, but then it's probably not sustainable because it's like I'm still using plastic and stuff and like tape.
But you're upcycling it.
Yeah, I know, but then it does get thrown away. That's the only thing. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. That's why I think it's like, because obviously it is using found materials, but then, you know what I mean? If you're on a shoot, it's like it's still
Yeah.
going in the bin because you can't like bring it all home and then like sort it out like meticulously. I don't know. It doesn't. I don't know. I'm probably a fraud.
No, but you communicate it really through the visual.
Yeah.
It's this idea of like using found materials.
Yeah,
So
sure.
rather than it being like shiny and new,
Yeah.
it's like stuff like this.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like you've used something, you found it, and you've like walked all over it, communicating this
Yeah.
human interaction with it, I guess.
But it's like you're saying, the power of like image makers, which is what you
Yeah.
are. It's like it's not. It is. It sounds very simple, but it's like I don't know, sort of envious, like of your sort of age group, because there is such an amazing thing to sort of work with. Whereas, I don't know, you know what I mean? It's like it's kind of like a flag being passed to you. Really.
Yeah. I mean, I struggled a bit a couple of years ago with this idea of showing someone that I'm upcycling. So like in a runway setting, you're showing your collection in like 2 minutes. So you have no time to be able to communicate something rather than like sitting here on a panel and like, explaining it to you all. So I was questioning like, how do I do that really quickly? So it was this idea of, okay, let me put trash on a sleeve, let me embroider a denim sleeve with all of these nuts and bolts that I found. So when you see it, you're like, oh my God, that's trash. I know that's trash. And then communicating that idea of I'm upcycling, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And then, but you see all these t-shirts, like t-shirt brands made of organic cotton, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And I don't know, I've always sort of been questioning between the two. I don't know, it's difficult. I don't want to go on like a design or tangent. Should we just move on? Question.
Conflict. No.
Yeah, go on.
Do you think we could ever have a carbon neutral, zero emission shoes? If you've got like stylists getting couriers from showrooms in New York, even if stuff like catering on set, do you think people from a production aspect are working towards that? Or do you think it's more responsibility of the individuals that are making those sustainable actions themselves? Does that make sense?
Especially in the last, I can probably give a quick initial insight into this, but over the last year and a half especially, I've been on shoots where people have been more conscious about it. Obviously, you're like shooting it, whether that be digital or film, and it was like film, there's loads of chemicals and stuff. You could go into it forever, but then again, no one's perfect. You can't be perfect, it's impossible. But there are things you can do, like, you know, why do you need that top from Balenciaga when there's like a stylist, a designer next door who has something absolutely amazing? Like, be more local, think outside the box, think, you know, with one another. There's been ridiculous. I remember like working at a company and we had to send a taxi from Paris to Italy to go and get 5 bags. Literally, what? It was just so, it blew my mind. And I was thinking, why is the fashion industry like leaving us to be so like needing all of this like consumption, or this think logically? You know what I mean? There was always a way of like thinking practically and logically about stuff. So I think, like, say if you were the stylist or the photographer on the shoot, you can decide how you want the shoot to run. So you could decide where everyone comes from, like how they travel there, what happens with the set afterwards. I don't know how. Do you want anything extra?
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
And then like I think you're saying, Lucy, about like the catering and production sort of side of it, where it's like even if it's sort of the overall message is kind of sustainable, but then it still is just kind of like everyone just gets thrown in to the ways. What were you saying, Lucy? What sort of aspect were you saying?
Have you tried to, like, when you've been doing, I don't know how many, like, if you've been doing shoots and stuff, but how have you tried to do it, or like be really considerate of the environment? Is it something you put into practice with your own work? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I guess with like casting, making sure people are using local models and focusing on local younger designers, which I think a lot of people, I don't know, there is a bit of a shift, but I think it gets a bit sticky when like advertising obviously comes into that. I think there is very much a responsibility of publications as well. I don't know, transparency, I don't think you can ever really have a total sustainable shoot for maybe a bigger company, but I think the students in particular when they're working, it's something they should really be conscious of, especially ordering stuff, returning stuff, and a lot of the travel that goes into things, whether it be direct or indirect. Because it's easier for someone to get a train to London, for example, and have to achieve with everything on their doorstep than or transport or order things to Manchester.
Yeah. I mean, as a student as well, like your impact on the world, the environment of the world is so tiny, but your voice can carry, so if you're making a shoot that's in a publication or magazine, your message is there forever, and it will feed on to the next person who reads it, and they might consider something when they're doing a shoot. And, so small voices make change. So I think that is something to just remember when you're doing stuff. Like, you might be at uni now, but, if you do something and that person's like, oh, amazing, like how you've organised the shoot and how they've really considered, those aspects, and maybe then you'll do it in your work next time.
We don't teach the stereotype. We teach them that to shoot their family or to shoot their sister or to shoot their, it's not about booking that's definitely not the ethos in fact, that sounds really dated, doesn't it? The notion of shoots is even getting really dated, like big budget travel. But these guys, we are trying to just back to Robin or anything, but we've got everything we need here right in front of us. We don't need to travel to somewhere or book fancy. Who is a model? Whoever said who's a model? Whoever said that person is a model? Do you know what I mean? Well, so, and I think we do a lot of work trying to just address these sorts of old stereotypes of shooting. Yeah, like I said, even the course is called styling image making, so that we don't even have the word I'm a fashion photographer, I'm a stylist. I don't even believe in these words. I don't even believe you. Who said that person's any more a stylist or a photographer? So anybody can grab some clothes and shoot somebody and make a shoot. It can be done on a phone. It can be done on so the whole notion, I think, hopefully is moving forward. There's a whole set of publications working really well with that. Things like More or Less is a leading Bible for us in terms of how images are made, to do with community, to do with, so, I don't know. Hopefully this generation won't. They'll be conscious about everything they do. Hopefully. I don't know.
Are there any more questions? No? Yeah?
As you work with Rory and Matthew, as you work with source materials, what's like the strangest thing you've had to upcycle or make new, like the sets and the clothing wise?
I think bread, maybe. Yeah. I did a shoot with Matty and we did like bread person, so like white loaves and sellotape. What else? Blue tack. Loads of your stuff is mad.
I was saying your stuff's made of blue tack.
I think that's about it. What else? Cakes. Yeah, lots of edible stuff.
Because yours can be like temporary.
Yeah, it's all temporary.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I remember like being in a scrapyard with an old mattress, but it was just like the wires, like the coils, and all these like Polish builders were around me, like, what is he doing? And I was just like chopping away this mattress, and it just became this, that like when you walk down the street and you see this barbed wire that's like in a coil, and they always have plastic on them, like blow. And I was trying to do something like that. So I was like, okay, yeah, mattress springs. So I was like, my hands were bleeding, I was covered in oil, and I was like chopping away this mattress spring, and it became this like handbag. And I mean, stylists love it because it's like this thing that you can just, I like making objects as well as garments. It's not always just about garments. But I call it a handbag because you hold it in it's, but yeah, probably that.
You talk about your tears.
Oh, right.
That's definitely strange.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really, well, is it fab? I don't know. I worked with a friend of mine, she's a bioscientist called Alice Potts, and she makes crystals from sweat. So she'll work a lot with athletes and stuff like that, and she'll grow She had these like ballet shoes that she grew crystals on. It was amazing. So I asked her a year and a half ago if she'd ever made crystals from tears, and she'd like researched it and she'd had knowledge into it but never done it. So over the course of like 2 months, I collected my tears. So I had to watch a lot of like sad films, and I was collecting them. I put them in the fridge, and so she made them into crystals. We didn't know if it was going to work, and it became this earring that I called the tear ring. So it's like crystals on the earring. But for me, it was this idea of, I was questioning value, and this idea of value with the clothing that we have. Not like, this costs that much, but the emotional investment we have in something. So maybe that leather jacket, you might have found it at one of your grandma's or something, and you have a really like close connection to it. The idea of embodying an emotion within a garment that you could never possibly throw away was really what I was trying to do with that, and that was really cool. I don't think was it a found object? If it's
Found one, yeah.
that was weird. But yeah, any more questions? Yeah.
There was an article on ID which said that thrift flipping was basically banned because people are buying like plus sized clothing from charity shops and upcycling it. And it's like a big trend on like TikTok and stuff now. People doing this, and it said that these plus size people were like annoyed initially at people buying these plus size garments because it meant that there was less for them to buy in store. What do you think about that? Do you think ID should have published that or not?
Is that the question? Do you think they should have published it? Well, me personally, I mean, I don't know, where would they find that statistic for a start? That's pretty crazy.
So someone that interviewed someone about it.
Oh, okay.
There's a few of these on here. Do you think it was good of them to publish that sort of stuff?
The question, Carrie, is there was an article on ID, right?
Yeah.
About younger generations upcycling bigger garments and taking them from the charity shops, and so plus size people who would buy them otherwise from the charity shops were getting really angry. And it just
like plus size people getting angry because there was less things for them to buy.
There was less things for them to buy, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a really interesting topic to talk about.
Yeah.
I think it's just really important in my mind that people are actually making and upcycling in general, because you could just buy something from a shop and like wear it on a night out and have no idea how it's made. But if you are upcycling, whether or not, in the beginning maybe you waste bits of the fabric or not, at least you're making and you're getting to like understand garment construction. There was a time when we all used to make our clothes in our houses, and I think that is the future. So I mean, there's a lot of clothes, like Carrie could probably tell you as well, but like in charity shops there is so much stuff. They just can't, because people in charity shops generally are volunteers as well, so they're volunteers as well, so there's not that many members of staff, and to deal with all this stuff, like you take to a charity shop, I'm done my bit now, I've donated it, they can't manage it, and there's piles and piles of stuff. Go to the sorting centres, like if you don't tie your shoes together and they get lost, there's like literally like in India, there's like places where all the shoes are lined up, and there's someone's job to go and match all the shoes up in like a massive haul. Like, how crazy is that? Just because you didn't tie them up.
I just thought it was like wrong for them to publish that anywhere. Because
you thought it was wrong.
It's like going to a charity shop and like then you're like making a room for charity shops to bring more into the shop floor, really. So like thrift flipping like is good. And they said awesome. That's just fine. Yeah, that's like
I think they probably did that from like a more inclusivity point of view, like someone flagged it, so they wanted to sort of signal that there is an issue like that. But I think it's very difficult to address, and it was maybe on like a personal basis, like someone actually dealt with that and wanted to sort of spread the word. But I think it would be really difficult to sort of put a finger on that and say like, oh, this is the solution. And I think it's a difficult.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we realise that actually, when we donate clothing, it's still part of the supply chain. It's almost like, we think that supply chain stops in our wardrobes, and we don't realise that this is all a part. It's actually, and I think companies are increasingly realising that's why we're seeing companies, like the Kering Group investing in Vestiaire. So they're seeing that their unsold stock, their unused garments are actually valuable. And we know it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there's actually very little transparency there, and really precarious jobs in countries like Ghana. There was a very interesting, trying to remember who it was, during Fashion Revolution Week, there was an Instagram live on who carried my clothes. And it was with the always present and somebody else. And they were talking about, the men and women who carry, twice our body weight, making, journey after journey every single day. If they fall over, they're going to, break limbs, they squash their children. And we don't think about these people risking their life just to carry our clothes. I think a lot of us just think that, when we donate clothing, that this is a really good thing to do, but I think it's about 70% of this clothing now that gets dumped on sub-Saharan Africa. It's destroying their local textile and tailoring economies. And we are seeing countries, we're seeing several countries banning the import of second-hand clothing. So we're going to need to find more ways to deal with our waste. I mean, upcycling is, as you'll know, Matthew, it's tiny, and fibre-to-fibre recycling is only 1% of all of the total recycling. So we really have to deal with our waste and really quickly. And there isn't the transparency there. I mean, in our Fashion Transparency Index, only, I think it's 27% of brands disclose what they do with their unsold stock and their off-carts. So, what do the other 75% do? In countries like France, we have the new legislation, the new anti-dumping legislation, and we haven't talked about the role of legislation yet, but, that's something we really need to see more of, Europe-wide and globally, to make companies take responsibility for their clothes at the end of their life.
100%. So I think that's all we've got time for, because it's about 4:30 now. But thank you so much for listening. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Carrie. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie, so much.
Bye, Carrie. Thank you so much.
Lovely to meet you.
Hope to see you soon.
Lovely to meet you. I know, it's hard.
There's a lot of interference, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you in a bit.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, bye.
Quite well.